Hi everyone, my name is Alexander and today I want to talk as well as inform you about some of the aspects regarding Elite and Ultimate mode compared to normal difficulty. If you are one of those who has managed to complete normal mode and went into Elite or Ultimate, then you probably noticed that some things work a bit different than before. Other aspects might not work at all, such as being surprised by something unfamiliar. Enumerating all of those aspects is impossible in one video. This is why I will concentrate only on those which looked particularly fresh and interesting from analytical and gameplay aspects. The first thing that I'm going to discuss in this video is some of the things that struck me on my journey through Elite and Ultimate, such as the fact that all of the bosses have higher casting, movement and attack speed. Some of them have even slightly changed phases of the fight. I will not mention all of them, instead I will show to you the ones that felt surprisingly different from normal mode. The second thing that I'm going to discuss and show is the importance of having multiple defensive layers, such as damage absorption or damage mitigation abilities, as well as defensive cancellation procs, active ointments and oils in a difficult fight, presence of either cluster in your inventory. Lack of those starts to become noticeable on Elite and vital on Ultimate. The third thing that I'm going to talk about is the importance of overcapping your resistances, as well as crafting and utilizing high-level resistance components and magical augments and their overall defensive boost to your character when compared to low-level ones. As a bonus, I'm going to mention dangerous attacks from some Nemesis bosses. Note that this is a subjective opinion, however, those nuances which I'm going to mention will make things easier for you, especially on hardcore. Without further ado, let's talk about slight changes in bosses' behavior on Elite and Ultimate. Theoden Marcel, who is the final boss in the first DLC, summons more monsters at his height on Elite difficulty from left and right corridors simultaneously. I had seen how those reinforcements came 2 times during the first phase on Elite difficulty. Perhaps if your damage is not high enough, then he will summon his allies once more, but don't quote me on that. Also, other foes appear faster right in front of him. Korvac, who is the last boss in second DLC, has a higher attack speed, movement speed as well as casting speed when it comes to Elite difficulty. I also realized that due to those factors, dodging some of his abilities becomes problematic. This is why on Elite difficulty I relied mostly on damage mitigation abilities, as well as damage absorption ones, rather than me trying to constantly avoid getting hit by some of his skills. Alchemist Lord Executioner has some new tricks up his sleeve. I am talking about the fact that his pulls which he creates on Elite and Ultimate difficulty lasts longer, as well as hurting your character harder. The other thing is that his Blade Arc ability has a higher resistance reduction ratio, which by default means that you can get critically hit by it. Darius Cromley's sphere that protects him from damage actually lasts longer on Elite and Ultimate difficulty. And also he throws faster those shards that creates ether fire on the ground. The odd ability which I have not mentioned in my previous video about this boss is worth to mention right now. I am talking about his skill to block your abilities. I do not believe it is a difficulty specific thing, nonetheless it's an important thing that you should know. When it comes to Father Kaiman boss fight on Elite difficulty, appearances of fire geysers happen faster and they also last longer than on normal mode. It will force you to move around the arena carefully, as well as aggro boss to a perfect position for a hit or two, but keep in mind that Kaiman also moves and attacks quicker than before. Having a higher health pool allows Morganet to summon 2 elites to aid him in a fight against your character. Perhaps the same thing applies to other bosses who can summon monsters at their command, but nonetheless, this quote-unquote new thing for me definitely was an unpleasant yet fresh approach when it comes to a fight against similar yet slightly different enemies. When I encountered and defeated Commander Lucius on Elite and Ultimate difficulty, most of the time I could not tell if there was any difference in a fight against him, due to the fact that my skeletons from Revenant Constellation blocked his movement a lot. With that said, when he shot his ranged abilities at me, especially in Ultimate difficulty, one thing drew my attention. He actually can chain them one after the other in a short time span. I could not imagine how things would unravel should I was playing a melee auto-attack character in that moment. How can I forget about an old friend, Warden Krieg? Sadly, when it comes to something new that he can put up front on Ultimate difficulty, is a big increase of his attack speed, yes, faster than other bosses on same difficulty. Everything else stays the same. It is time to discuss defensive layers. Let me be completely honest with you here. If you want to play a quote-unquote glass cannon, or any other character with an approach of doing a bunch of quote-unquote corpse runs, then by no means go for it. I'm not going to say something against it or judge you. The purpose of my approach is applicable for those who favors a more defensive approach. But if you want to see how things works on higher difficulties when it comes to defense, then you definitely should stay a while and listen. There is no such thing as having too much defense in this game. You can feel a lack of damage for sure, but in campaign on Elite and Ultimate, you do not have a timer which at the end of it will kill your character, and you do not have some form of quote-unquote enrage mechanic that will activate on an enemy and will grant him an ability to one-shot your character if you hit a boss or an elite for too long. With that said, sacrificing some of your damage in favor of defense is actually a good thing in my opinion. But for you to succeed in completing harder difficulties, it is worth to stack them on top of each other. Let me elaborate more on some of this stuff. On Elite and especially on Ultimate difficulty, every fight either against one boss or big group of monsters, with or without an elite enemy among them, can quickly drain your health bar, despite having your resistances higher than your soft cap level, which is 80%, as well as having your defensive ability closer to 3000 Ultimate standard. Even some foes that were insignificant to you at normal difficulty will become a threat if not on Elite, then on Ultimate for sure. This forces you to change your tactic when you are in a fight against them. Let's focus on defensive constellations, which I had found were a good choice for adding those layers of protection on your character. Ghoul, as well as its prog Ghoulish Hunger, will save you from a death screen and or character creation screen if you will attack a foe, which was tough or dumb enough to trigger its effect. Even on characters with low percentage of attack damage conversion to health, it is still worth to utilize it. From what I have heard, even some casters use it. The only two downsides of this effect are that it triggers on low HP, and believe me, 45% when it comes to a boss fight, especially on Ultimate difficulty, is a critical condition. Second downside is that you have to keep attacking to regenerate your health, and not get hard CC'd when this effect procs. All in all, this is your last resort skill, which means you have to have something more for your survivability. Now I will discuss Wayward Soul, which is a trigger effect from the Chariot of the Dead constellation. It might initially seem like this constellation gives more to damage rather than to defense. And you're almost right, with the exception of its proc, that has a 20% chance of activating when you are being hit. Those are your go-to protection mechanisms that you need to have on a character as much as possible. This trigger will give you armor, health regen and more defensive ability at the same time. Great quote-unquote bang for your buck, if you ask me. Following its footsteps, I would like to highlight Behemoth constellation, that has an effect, Giant's Blood, which has a 15% chance to trigger when you are getting hit, and will give you very high health regeneration. Knots in this constellation are more focused on boosting your overall health pool, as well as health regen, but in my opinion it's still worth it to pick up. Now I would also like to point out Crab constellation as well as its proc, Arcane Barrier, that has a 15% chance of activating when you are getting hit. This barrier has a good chance of saving you from heavy hitting attack, due to the fact that it can absorb almost all the damage from it. With that said, I would like to mention two more constellations that will serve you as another line of protection: Solemn Watcher and Empty Throne. They do not have an active trigger effect on them, but instead they have either good amount of resistances or tremendous boost to your defense, as well as your overall protection. In my subjective opinion, picking up all of the previously mentioned stars, or at least their equivalent, is necessary if you want to succeed on Elite and Ultimate difficulty. Let's also discuss whether or not you should craft and utilize ointments and oils as well as ether clusters during a fight. By themselves, they provide another line of defense that will either help you quote-unquote close your Lycan resistances, or boost your various stats to another level, like more attack damage conversion to life, more health regen, more damage, etc. I recommend first and foremost craft and wear them in your inventory starting from Elite difficulty. Apply them even if you feel like on normal difficulty certain bosses or areas does not give you any problem. Trust me, you will swiftly reconsider. When it comes to proper usage of Ether Cluster, I like to use it as a quote-unquote save me from that nasty damage button. You might want to experiment with its proper usage, but nonetheless, at least have it with you. Now it is time to talk about damage mitigation skills and damage absorption abilities. This is not a thoroughly researched subject by me yet, but I assume that every character in this game has some form of damage reduction, absorption or immunity skill. I will be mostly focusing on how, where and when it's best to apply them, mentioning mostly Death Knight abilities. I will primarily going to mention two of them: Mark of Torment and Warcry. When it comes to Warcry, at 12 out of 12 it will give 25% reduction of attack from every enemy who were in its area of effect. To be honest, on Ultimate difficulty I was using this ability always, no matter who I was fighting, regular monsters or bosses. On the Elite difficulty I was applying this effect mostly on Elite foes and on bosses. I would strongly advise you to do the same if you have this ability or its equivalent. I would like to briefly mention Break Morale effect, which triggers the quote-unquote silence effect attached to it. You should know that some of your foes will be resilient to this proc. To be honest, I rarely saw any changes in monster behavior, even those who had multiple spells in their arsenal usually continued to hit me with them. Try not to rely on silence effect too often. Nonetheless, Warcry as well as Mark of Torment, in my opinion, will grant you more defensive layers for you to work with. Mark of Torment, when maxed to its respective soft cap level, will grant you 50% damage absorption as well as 300% damage absorption will be reflected to your attacker, the foe against whom you use this ability. I was using this skill on Elite and Ultimate difficulty, either on tankier targets in a big group, for example Flesh Hulks or Ethereal Amalgamation, before starting a fight with them, and during a fight itself. However, you should always utilize this skill on bosses, or on some of the Elite enemies, especially if you are vulnerable to a certain type of damage from them. You have to keep in mind its cooldown, as well as the fact that it only works on one foe. Let's speak about the importance of overcapping your resistances as well as crafting and utilizing high-level resistance components. The option to work towards overcapping your defensive parameters comes hand in hand with endgame components as well as obtaining and wearing a better gear. I will not going to discuss gearing aspect despite knowing about its importance, because I lack the necessary amount of knowledge to advise others where you should look for a better equipment. With that said, I will mention two things that helped me become more prepared for Elite and Ultimate difficulty. First, I was looking for and buying gear from DLC's faction: Barrowholm, Coven, Melmoth Resistance, and Conclave of Soleil, Drick or Bismael. The other thing that I have done is farming Greek set pieces from 3 different bosses. I will leave the link in the description of this video where you can find them. When it comes to what endgame components and magical augments you can craft or buy, you should always remember that on Elite, good defensive percentage is 100%, and on Ultimate it is from 110% to 120%. Those are standards of your resistances that has been established by more experienced players, and I personally agree with them. Keep in mind that on Elite mode, by default, your resistances will be lowered by 25%, and on Ultimate number rises to 50%. But do not think that having those desired numbers will allow you to quote-unquote dance in all of the abilities, and do not give a damn about them. You'll still need to have those defensive lines that I mentioned earlier: constellations, ointments and oils, damage mitigation or absorption abilities. But I went off topic. Let's see what you need to craft in terms of components. Ugdenbok leather gives 20% resistance to poison and acid and same amount of bleeding resistance. It is a straight upgrade from Anti-Venom Self and Silk Swatch. It also adds plus 30 to your defensive ability, which by default makes your character tougher. The component can be used in all armor from level 75. Spell Scorched Plating gives plus 100 health, 20% pierce resistance, as well as 15% elemental resistance. It gives more protection from elemental damage than Runestone, which can only be used in head armor. This component can be applied to all armor, starting from level 75. Prismatic Diamond is another high-level component that not only gives 20% damage reflection, 7% elemental resistance, as well as 20% energy absorption from enemy spells. It also has a Prismatic Rage ability, which triggers when your health goes below 40%. It gives you 10% total damage and speed boost, and in my opinion this acts as another line of your defense and offense at the same time. The only drawback, you can only use it in head armor. When it comes to having a component that gives vitality resistance and ether resistance, you can craft Tainted Heart. It gives 12% to both of the previously mentioned parameters. As a bonus, you can also get plus 5 critical damage and plus 22 to your offensive ability. It gives less ether resistance than Ether Soul, as well as less resistance to vitality than Soul Shard. However, you can compensate your losses in defense by applying magical augments. More on that a bit later. Tainted Heart can be used in amulets and medals starting from level 75. Bloodied Crystal is another endgame component that can be used in rings, amulets and medals. It gives plus 40 defensive ability, plus 75 armor, and 15% bleeding resistance. This is your go-to component if your bleed resist isn't reached over capped threshold yet. With that said, I do not want to dismiss those components that are useful even at ultimate difficulty. Those are Sanctified Bone, Eater's Soul, and Soul Shard. You can use them if you see that you're liking defensive options against Ether, Chaos, or Vitality damage, and mix them up with high-level protection stuff. Which magical augments you should buy and apply to your gear strongly depends on your current situation. Did you reach overcap in your defense? Are you still lacking some form of protection against certain damage, etc. If you ask me, I will always advise you to check your overcap threshold first, that is 100% on Elite and 120 on Ultimate. From this perspective, you can decide whether you need to apply more resistances in the form of augments or not. Just make sure from time to time to visit faction vendors to buy and apply those things, especially ones that are in DLCs, and you should be good to go. Now I'm going to talk about some of the dangerous attacks from Nemesis Bosses. I had fought against 2 Nemesis Bosses on Elite difficulty, as well as encountered and defeated 2 more on Ultimate mode. I am aware at this point that for every character their difficulty curve can be different, yet still highlighting some of their dangerous attacks is a thing that I feel is crucial if you want to feel more prepared against unpleasant surprises. Let's start with Chupacabra, the Endless Menace. This was my first encounter with the Nemesis boss on Elite and I was a bit scared, to be honest. I never watched any of those videos where other people are fighting and defeating him, and this is why I decided to over-prepare a bit by using ointment, oils and having Killer Cluster with me, should things will go wrong. The longer I kited and hit him, the more I started to realize that his main danger comes in the form of stacking those red pools under your character, as well as applying resistance reduction to vitality damage in the form of red breath. Other than that, his cloning ability, as well as melee attacks, does not seem to hit me pretty hard. I guess on Ultimate he will be a completely different beast. My next encounter with another Nemesis was against Archmage Alexander. I was fighting him on Elite difficulty. To be honest, I still do not get why some of those mages, even mage bosses, are designed to go in melee range in this game against characters who outscales them in this area of expertise. Before facing him I used ointments, oils and had my Ether Cluster prepared. As it turns out, he only has one heavy hitting yet incredibly telegraphed attack. I am talking about his meteor from the sky. Unless you are not paying attention to your surroundings, you should not have any problems of killing this guy, especially if you are a melee character. Musilok the Chillwind was my first Nemesis on Ultimate difficulty. I had fought him in the Steps of Torment and was ready for this fight with my oils, ointments and Ether Cluster. Important to note that this boss has 2 phases. In his first phase, his threatening ability is Blizzard, that reduces your defensive ability and movement speed. When it comes to his second phase, he casts Blizzard more often, and the skill also has a bigger area of effect. One other thing that you should be mindful of is his 4 crystals that are shooting freezing projectiles. If you do not have high freezing resistance, you can get permafrost effect. Luckily, you can destroy those crystals, or your other option would be to move this boss from them. The last Nemesis boss that I had seen on Ultimate is Valderan, the Storm Scourge. Many times he was spotted in underground passage, near the Warden Creek laboratory, or directly in lab. As far as I understood, his most threatening thing is the ability to stack high amount of electrocute damage the longer the fight goes, as well as reduce your resistances to elemental damage. This, with the combination of his other ability that allows him to teleport quote-unquote in your face, makes him a dangerous foe for anyone who doesn't keep track of how much electrocute damage he is receiving every second. I recommend disengaging from a fight and trying to reduce or get rid of electrocute damage to you when you feel like you were hit a lot and if possible, bait or play around his teleporting skill. The last thing that you want is receiving high amounts of damage from electrocute, and when trying to disengage, getting killed because he teleported near you and kept attacking your character. Moving on to the conclusion. I hope that now you have a better grasp of some of the gameplay things that are different and unique on Elite and Ultimate difficulty. I do not want to discourage you from trying more challenging modes, and hopefully, with the help of this video, you will be eager to push yourselves to a new heights. Do know that this is a subjective opinion and you are free to disagree with things that I mentioned. I hope that you had fun watching it, and perhaps learn a thing or two about endgame content of Grim Dawn. If you want to, you can leave your comments below and share your experience of playing for the first time on Elite and Ultimate. I will be grateful for it. With that being said, I will see you all in my next videos. Take care